Welcome to a journey through the grand tapestry of human history, where we will explore the remarkable story of our species from its earliest origins to the foundations of the civilizations that shaped our world. This is a tale that spans millions of years, chronicling the extraordinary transformation of our ancestors from small bands of early hominids wandering the African savanna to the architects of complex societies that would lay the groundwork for everything we know today. Our story begins in the midst of prehistoric time, when the first stirrings of what would become humanity took their tentative steps across the landscapes of ancient Africa. Picture, if you will, the vast expanses of the African continent some 7 million years ago, a world vastly different from what we know today. The climate was changing. Forests were giving way to grasslands, and in this shifting environment, our earliest ancestors faced choices that would echo through the millennia. The air was thick with the sounds of creatures that no longer exist, and the horizon stretched endlessly across savannas dotted with acacia trees and watering holes that served as gathering places for countless species. The journey of human evolution is not a simple linear progression, but rather a complex branching tree of development, with multiple species of early hominids exploring different evolutionary paths. Among these early pioneers were the Australopithecines, whose most famous representative, Lucy, walked upright across the Ethiopian highlands some 3.2 million years ago. Standing barely 3.5 feet tall, Lucy and her kind represented a crucial step in our evolutionary journey, demonstrating that bipedalism, the ability to walk on two legs, was one of the defining characteristics that would set our lineage apart from our closest relatives. Her fossilized remains, discovered in 1974, tell us that she lived in a world of volcanic activity and changing landscapes, where survival required constant adaptation to new challenges and opportunities. But Lucy was just one chapter in a much longer story. As we move forward through time, we encounter Homo habilis, the handyman, who lived approximately 2.8 million years ago. These early humans made a leap that would prove revolutionary. They began to deliberately shape tools from stone. The creation of these first crude implements marked the beginning of technology, a defining characteristic of human civilization. These early tool makers chipped away at rocks to create sharp edges for cutting meat and breaking bones, demonstrating a level of planning and foresight that separated them from other animals. They gathered in small groups around tool-making sites, sharing knowledge and techniques that would be passed down through generations, creating the first technological traditions in human history. The mastery of fire represents another pivotal moment in our prehistoric journey, occurring perhaps as early as 1.7 million years ago with Homo erectus. Imagine the profound impact of this discovery on our ancestors' lives. Fire provided warmth in the cold nights, protection from predators, light in the darkness, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to cook food. Cooking transformed not just what our ancestors could eat, but how their bodies developed. Cooked food was easier to digest, providing more calories and nutrients, which in turn supported the growth of larger brains. This relationship between fire, cooking, and brain development created a positive feedback loop that accelerated human evolution. The control of fire also extended the day, allowing for social activities after dark and creating opportunities for storytelling, planning, and cultural development that would prove crucial to human advancement. Homo erectus, who emerged around 1.9 million years ago, became the first of our ancestors to venture beyond Africa. These intrepid early humans spread across Asia, reaching as far as modern-day Georgia, China, and Indonesia. They carried with them not just their genes, but their knowledge of fire and tool-making, spreading human culture across continents for the first time. Their journey represents one of the greatest migrations in Earth's history, as small groups of early humans ventured into unknown territories, adapting to new climates and environments. These migrations required remarkable courage and adaptability, as our ancestors encountered new predators, unfamiliar plants, different seasonal patterns, and challenging geographical barriers that tested their ingenuity and determination. The evolution of language during this period remains one of the most fascinating mysteries of human development. While we cannot know exactly when our ancestors first began to communicate with complex spoken language, The evidence suggests that this ability developed gradually over hundreds of thousands of years. Language was not just a means of communication, but a revolutionary tool that allowed knowledge to be shared and preserved across generations. Stories, techniques, warnings, and wisdom could now be passed down from parent to child, creating the first libraries of human knowledge stored not in books, but in memory and speech. The development of language-enabled cooperation on an unprecedented scale, allowing groups to coordinate hunting strategies, share information about distant resources, and maintain social bonds across extended family networks. As we approach more recent times in our evolutionary story, we encounter the Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives who lived in Europe and parts of Asia from approximately 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. Far from the brutish cave dwellers of popular imagination, Neanderthals were sophisticated beings who created tools, controlled fire, buried their dead with ceremony, and even created art. They lived through multiple ice ages, adapting to harsh climates that would challenge even modern humans equipped with modern technology. Neanderthal communities developed specialized tools for different tasks, created jewelry and decorative objects, and maintained complex social relationships that extended across vast territories. The relationship between Neanderthals and our own species, Homo sapiens, is complex and fascinating. Recent genetic research has revealed that most people of non-African descent carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, evidence of interbreeding between our species during the period when both coexisted. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. These early members of our species possessed all the physical and cognitive capabilities that define humanity today. They created sophisticated tools, developed complex social structures, and began to express themselves through art. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, created tens of thousands of years ago, reveal minds capable of abstract thought, artistic expression, and symbolic communication. These ancient artists did not merely record what they saw, but interpreted and transformed their experiences into lasting works of beauty and meaning. The paintings show detailed knowledge of animal behavior, sophisticated understanding of color and composition, and the ability to work collaboratively on large-scale projects that required planning and coordination among multiple individuals. The Great Migration of modern humans out of Africa began approximately 70,000 years ago, as small groups ventured into the Middle East and beyond. This exodus would eventually lead to the colonization of every continent except Antarctica, as humans adapted to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests. Each new environment presented unique challenges and opportunities, leading to the development of diverse cultures and technologies suited to local conditions. The journey to Australia, accomplished over 50,000 years ago, required sophisticated boat-building skills and navigation techniques that demonstrate the remarkable ingenuity of these early explorers. The peopling of the Americas, which occurred during the last ice age when sea levels were lower and land bridges existed, represents another extraordinary achievement in human exploration and adaptation. For most of human history, our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers, existing in small, mobile groups that followed the seasonal patterns of plants and animals. This lifestyle, which sustained humanity for hundreds of thousands of years, required intimate knowledge of the natural world. Hunter-gatherers needed to understand the behavior of dozens of animal species, the seasonal cycles of hundreds of plants, the patterns of weather and water, and the subtle signs that indicated danger or opportunity. This deep ecological knowledge was passed down through generations, creating rich oral traditions that preserved essential survival information. These societies developed sophisticated tracking skills, understanding animal migration patterns, and creating detailed mental maps of vast territories that included information about water sources, seasonal food availability, and safe shelter locations. The social structures of hunter-gatherer societies were remarkably egalitarian compared to later agricultural civilizations. Resources were typically shared within the group, and while there were certainly leaders and specialists, the extreme hierarchies that would characterize later societies had not yet emerged. Decision-making was often collective, and the survival of the group depended on cooperation and mutual support. These societies developed sophisticated systems of reciprocity and exchange that extended far beyond individual bands, creating networks of trade and alliance that spanned vast distances. Marriage customs, gift exchange, and ceremonial gatherings served to maintain relationships between distant groups and ensure genetic diversity within populations. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture represents one of the most profound transformations in human history, a change so significant that historians call it the Neolithic Revolution. This transformation did not happen overnight but unfolded over thousands of years, beginning approximately 12,000 years ago in various parts of the world. The end of the last ice age created new opportunities as glaciers retreated and climates stabilized, but it also presented challenges as familiar environments changed and traditional food sources became less reliable. Rising sea levels flooded coastal areas where many communities had lived, while changing precipitation patterns altered the distribution of plants and animals that hunter-gatherers had depended upon for millennia. In the Fertile Crescent, the region stretching from modern-day Turkey through Syria and Iraq to Iran, some of the world's first farmers began to experiment with cultivating wild grasses that would eventually become wheat and barley. This was not a sudden discovery, but a gradual process of observation, experimentation, and adaptation. Hunter-gatherers had long understood the growth cycles of plants and had probably been managing wild resources for generations before true agriculture emerged. The transition involved learning to select the best seeds, prepare the soil, protect growing crops from animals and weather, and store surplus grain for future use. Early farmers discovered that certain plants grew better when their seeds were deliberately planted rather than scattered naturally, and they began to notice that some individual plants produced larger or more nutritious seeds than others. The development of agriculture was not limited to the Fertile Crescent. Independent agricultural revolutions occurred in China with rice and millet, in Mesoamerica with corn and beans, in the Andes with potatoes and quinoa, in New Guinea with bananas and taro, and in eastern North America with squash and sunflowers. Each of these agricultural centers developed unique crops and techniques suited to local conditions, but all shared the fundamental innovation of deliberately cultivating plants for food. In China, farmers learned to create terraced fields that could hold water for rice cultivation, while in the Americas, indigenous peoples developed sophisticated techniques for growing corn in diverse environments ranging from tropical lowlands to high-altitude mountain valleys. The domestication of animals accompanied the development of plant agriculture, creating mixed farming systems that could support larger populations than either hunting or plant cultivation alone. Dogs were probably the first animals to be domesticated, initially serving as hunting companions and guards before their roles expanded to include herding and protection of livestock. Sheep and goats followed, providing meat, milk, and wool, while cattle offered not only food products but also labor for plowing fields. Pigs, chickens, and other animals were added to the domestic menagerie, each contributing to the growing complexity and productivity of agricultural societies. The relationship between humans and domestic animals created new forms of interdependence that required sophisticated understanding of animal behavior, breeding techniques, and management practices. The agricultural revolution brought profound changes to human society that extended far beyond food production. For the first time in human history, it became possible to produce more food than was immediately needed, creating agricultural surpluses that could support individuals who were not directly involved in food production. This surplus was the foundation upon which all subsequent human civilization would be built, enabling the development of specialized craftspeople, traders, warriors, priests, and rulers. The ability to store food for future use required new technologies, including pottery for storage vessels, granaries for bulk storage, and techniques for preserving food against spoilage and pest damage. The shift to agriculture also meant that humans could establish permanent settlements for the first time. No longer did they need to follow herds or seasonal plants. Instead, they could build lasting homes near their fields and storage facilities. These early villages grew into towns and eventually cities, creating the first urban centers in human history. The remains of Ayasofya in modern-day Turkey, dating to approximately 9,000 years ago, show us one of these early settlements, where thousands of people lived in closely packed houses, creating one of the first true communities in human history. The houses at Miu Ataoik were built without streets, with residents entering their homes through holes in the roof, and the walls were decorated with elaborate murals depicting hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and religious symbols. With permanent settlement came the need for new forms of social organization. Hunter-gatherer bands rarely exceeded a few dozen individuals, but agricultural villages could support hundreds or even thousands of people. This required new systems of governance, new methods of resolving disputes, and new ways of organizing labor and distributing resources. The egalitarian structures of hunter-gatherer societies gave way to more hierarchical organizations, with leaders, specialists, and eventually distinct social classes. The management of agricultural production required coordination of planting and harvesting activities, maintenance of irrigation systems, and defense against raiders who might steal stored grain or livestock. The storage of agricultural surplus created the first significant accumulations of wealth in human history. Granaries filled with grain represented security against famine, but also power and status for those who controlled them. The need to protect these stores from raiders and to organize their distribution led to the emergence of warrior classes and administrative bureaucracies. The seeds of social stratification were planted in the fertile soil of agricultural surplus. Those who controlled the largest stores of grain could support more dependents, attract more followers, and exercise greater influence over community decisions, creating the foundations for the complex hierarchies that would characterize later civilizations. Trade networks expanded dramatically during the Neolithic period as agricultural communities sought materials that were not available locally. Obsidian from volcanic regions was prized for making sharp tools and weapons, traveling hundreds of miles from its sources to communities that valued its superior cutting properties. Precious stones, metals, and exotic materials traveled hundreds of miles along emerging trade routes. These networks not only moved goods but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices, creating the first truly interconnected human communities. The development of trade required new forms of social organization, including systems for measuring value, methods of transportation, and diplomatic relationships between distant communities. The development of pottery represents another crucial innovation of this period. Clay vessels allowed for better storage of grain and other foods, improved cooking techniques, and new methods of food preparation. The decoration of pottery also provided one of the first widespread forms of artistic expression in agricultural societies, with distinctive styles that help archaeologists trace the spread of cultures and ideas across ancient landscapes. Different communities developed characteristic pottery styles that reflected local traditions, available materials, and cultural preferences, creating a rich diversity of ceramic art that provides insights into ancient life and beliefs. As agricultural communities grew larger and more complex, the need for record-keeping became apparent. The earliest forms of writing emerged from the practical necessity of tracking agricultural production, trade transactions, and resource distribution. Simple tokens and marks evolved into more sophisticated systems of notation, laying the groundwork for the written languages that would revolutionize human communication and knowledge preservation. These early recording systems allowed communities to track debts and credits, monitor the performance of different fields and crops, and maintain records of trade relationships with distant partners. The Neolithic Revolution also brought changes to human health and demographics. Agricultural diets, while more reliable than hunter-gatherer subsistence, were often less diverse and nutritious. The close proximity of humans and domestic animals in permanent settlements created new opportunities for disease transmission as pathogens jumped from animals to humans and spread rapidly through dense populations. However, these challenges were offset by the ability of agricultural societies to support much larger populations than had ever been possible before. The increased population density also accelerated cultural innovation, as more minds working together could develop new solutions to common problems. Religious and spiritual practices evolved alongside these social and economic changes. The seasonal cycles of planting and harvest gave new meaning to concepts of death and rebirth, while the accumulation of surplus and the development of social hierarchies created new roles for religious specialists. Temples and ceremonial centers began to appear in agricultural communities, serving not only as places of worship, but as centers of economic and political power. Agricultural societies developed elaborate rituals associated with planting and harvest, often involving community-wide celebrations that reinforced social bonds and shared cultural values. The innovations of the Neolithic Revolution set the stage for all subsequent human development. The ability to produce food surpluses, support large populations, and create permanent settlements provided the foundation for the rise of the world's first civilizations. As we transition from this prehistoric period to the dawn of recorded history, we see how these fundamental changes in human society created the conditions necessary for the emergence of complex urban civilizations that would transform the world. The agricultural techniques, social institutions, and cultural practices developed during the Neolithic period would be refined and elaborated by later civilizations, but the basic framework for complex society had been established. The story of human evolution and the agricultural revolution reveals the remarkable adaptability and ingenuity that have always characterized our species. From the first tentative steps of our earliest ancestors across the African landscape to the establishment of the first farming communities, humans have consistently demonstrated an ability to innovate, adapt, and overcome challenges that would have defeated less resilient species. This legacy of innovation and adaptation would prove crucial as human societies face the new challenges and opportunities that came with the rise of civilization. As we move forward in our historical journey, we will see how the foundations laid during this prehistoric period supported the construction of increasingly complex societies. The agricultural surplus that first appeared in Neolithic villages would grow to support the massive populations of ancient cities. The trade networks that connected early farming communities would expand to span continents. The social hierarchies that emerged in agricultural settlements would evolve into the elaborate class systems of ancient empires. And the first experiments with record-keeping would develop into the sophisticated writing systems that would preserve human knowledge and literature for posterity. The transition from prehistory to history marks not just a change in the availability of written records, but a fundamental transformation in the scale and complexity of human society. The stage was now set for the emergence of the world's first true civilizations, beginning with the remarkable societies that arose in the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, where the convergence of agricultural innovation, urban development, and technological advancement would create something entirely new in human experience. In the land between the rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates flow through what is now modern Iraq, humanity took its next great leap forward. Here, in the region known as Mesopotamia, the world's first urban civilizations emerged around 5,500 years ago, building upon the agricultural foundations established during the Neolithic Revolution to create societies of unprecedented complexity and sophistication. The name Mesopotamia itself, derived from Greek words meaning between rivers, captures the essential geographical feature that made this remarkable civilization possible. The geography of Mesopotamia was both a blessing and a challenge for its early inhabitants. The annual flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers deposited rich silt across the landscape, creating some of the most fertile soil on Earth. However, this fertility came at a price. The floods were unpredictable and could be devastatingly destructive, while the summer months brought scorching heat and drought that could destroy crops and threaten survival. The successful settlement of this region required not just agricultural knowledge, but sophisticated engineering and organizational skills. The rivers themselves were temperamental, sometimes changing course dramatically and leaving formerly fertile areas high and dry while flooding previously safe settlements. The earliest inhabitants of Mesopotamia learned to harness the power of the rivers through an elaborate system of canals, dikes, and irrigation channels. This infrastructure required coordinated labor from hundreds or thousands of individuals, creating the need for new forms of social organization and leadership. The construction and maintenance of irrigation systems became one of the driving forces behind the development of complex government structures and social hierarchies that characterized Mesopotamian civilization. Teams of workers had to dig channels, build embankments, clear blockages, and coordinate the distribution of water among different communities, all of which required careful planning and strong leadership. The Sumerians, who established the world's first urban civilization in southern Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, created innovations that would influence human society for millennia. Their cities, including Uruk, Eridu, and Babylon, were marvels of ancient engineering, featuring massive walls, elaborate temples, and sophisticated water management systems. Uruk, which may have been the world's first true city, housed tens of thousands of inhabitants at its peak, making it larger than any human settlement that had existed before. The city covered over 2 square miles and was surrounded by walls that stretched for more than 6 miles, demonstrating both the wealth and the organizational capacity of its inhabitants. At the heart of each Sumerian city stood the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that served as both a temple and a symbol of the city's power and prosperity. These structures, some reaching heights of over 200 feet, required enormous investments of labor and resources to construct. The ziggurats were dedicated to the patron deities of each city, reflecting the central role that religion played in Mesopotamian society. The priests who maintained these temples wielded enormous influence, controlling not only spiritual matters but also much of the economic and political life of their communities. The construction of a ziggurat could take decades and required the coordination of thousands of workers, from laborers who moved earth and stone to skilled craftsmen who created decorative elements and religious artifacts. The development of writing represents perhaps the most significant contribution of Mesopotamian civilization to human history. The earliest known writing system, cuneiform, emerged in Sumer around 3200 BCE, initially as a practical tool for recording economic transactions and administrative information. Clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped marks allowed merchants to track inventories, rulers to record laws and decrees, and priests to maintain temple records. What began as a simple accounting system evolved into a sophisticated means of communication capable of expressing complex ideas, stories, and emotions. Scribes became essential members of Mesopotamian society, spending years learning to read and write the hundreds of symbols that made up the cuneiform system. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest known works of literature, demonstrates the remarkable sophistication that Mesopotamian writing achieved. This ancient poem tells the story of a legendary king's quest for immortality, exploring themes of friendship, mortality, and the human condition that remain relevant today. The epic was copied and recopied for over 1,000 years, spreading throughout the ancient Near East and influencing literary traditions across multiple cultures. The story follows Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu through adventures that include battles with monsters, journeys to distant lands, and ultimately a confrontation with the reality of human mortality that gives the epic its enduring power and relevance. Mesopotamian law codes represent another crucial innovation in human governance. The Code of Hammurabi, created by the Babylonian king Hammurabi around 1750 BCE, established one of the first comprehensive legal systems in human history. This code, inscribed on a massive stone pillar over 7 feet tall, contained nearly 300 laws covering everything from property rights and commercial transactions to family relationships and criminal penalties. The principle of proportional justice, often summarized as an eye for an eye, provided a framework for legal decision-making that influenced legal systems throughout the ancient world. The code established different penalties for different social classes, reflecting the hierarchical nature of Mesopotamian society while also providing legal protections for all members of the community. The economic innovations of Mesopotamian civilization were equally groundbreaking. The development of standardized weights and measures facilitated trade across vast distances, while the invention of the wheel revolutionized transportation and manufacturing. Mesopotamian merchants established trade networks that stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to Anatolia in the west, exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies across thousands of miles. The use of silver as a medium of exchange created one of the world's first monetary systems, enabling complex commercial transactions and the accumulation of wealth on an unprecedented scale. Merchants developed sophisticated techniques for calculating interest, managing credit, and organizing long-distance trading expeditions that could take months or even years to complete. Agricultural techniques in Mesopotamia advanced far beyond the simple farming methods of the Neolithic period, Farmers developed sophisticated irrigation systems that could channel water across miles of terrain, allowing cultivation of areas that would otherwise have been too dry for agriculture. They practiced crop rotation to maintain soil fertility and developed new varieties of grains that could thrive in the challenging Mesopotamian environment. The agricultural surplus produced by these innovations supported not only the farmers themselves, but also the craftspeople, traders, priests, and rulers who made up the complex social hierarchy of Mesopotamian cities. Farmers learned to manage the timing of planting and harvesting to take advantage of seasonal flooding patterns, and they developed techniques for storing grain that could preserve food supplies for years. The social structure of Mesopotamian civilization was highly stratified, with distinct classes that had different rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. At the top of the hierarchy stood the king, believed to be chosen by the gods to rule on their behalf. Below the king were the nobles and high priests, who controlled much of the land and wealth of the city. Merchants and skilled craftspeople formed a middle class, while farmers and laborers made up the majority of the population. At the bottom of the social ladder were slaves, often prisoners of war or people who had fallen into debt. Despite these hierarchies, Mesopotamian society provided opportunities for social mobility, particularly for those who mastered valuable skills like writing, craftsmanship, or trade. Women in Mesopotamian society had more rights and opportunities than in many later civilizations, though their status varied considerably depending on their social class and the specific time period. Some women could own property, engage in business, and even serve as priestesses in important temples. The goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, was one of the most important deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon, reflecting the significant role that female divine figures played in religious belief. Women could work as merchants, artisans, and tavern keepers, and some achieved considerable wealth and influence through their business activities. Marriage contracts and legal documents show that women could initiate divorce proceedings and had rights to property and inheritance. Mesopotamian mathematics and astronomy laid the foundations for scientific thinking that would influence human knowledge for thousands of years. Mesopotamian mathematicians developed the sexagesimal system based on the number 60, which we still use today for measuring time and angles. Their astronomers created the first systematic observations of celestial movements, developing calendars, and predicting eclipses with remarkable accuracy. This knowledge was not merely academic but had practical applications in agriculture, navigation, and religious ceremonies. Mesopotamian scholars created detailed records of planetary movements, identified constellations, and developed mathematical techniques for calculating areas, volumes, and other geometric properties. The military innovations of Mesopotamian civilizations transformed warfare and contributed to the rise and fall of empires throughout the region. The development of bronze weapons and armor gave Mesopotamian armies significant advantages over enemies equipped with stone and copper tools. The invention of the war chariot revolutionized battlefield tactics, allowing rapid movement of elite warriors and creating new forms of military organization. The construction of massive fortifications around major cities reflected both the wealth of these communities and the constant threat of warfare that characterized the ancient Near East. Mesopotamian armies developed sophisticated siege techniques, including battering rams, siege towers, and methods for undermining city walls. The rise and fall of successive Mesopotamian empires demonstrates both the achievements and the vulnerabilities of early urban civilization. The Akkadian Empire, established by Sargon of Akkad around 2300 BCE, was one of the world's first multi-ethnic empires, uniting Sumerian and Akkadian peoples under a single ruler. Sargon's conquests created a vast domain that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, demonstrating the military and organizational capabilities that had developed in Mesopotamia. The Babylonian Empire reached its zenith under Nebuchadnezzar II, who constructed the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon and conquered Jerusalem. The Assyrian Empire developed the most efficient military machine of the ancient world, using iron weapons, cavalry, and siege engines to dominate the Near East for centuries. However, the complexity that made these civilizations so successful also made them vulnerable to collapse. The elaborate irrigation systems that supported Mesopotamian agriculture required constant maintenance and could be disrupted by warfare, natural disasters, or political instability. The concentration of population in cities made them vulnerable to disease outbreaks and food shortages. The wealth that accumulated in urban centers attracted raiders and conquerors from less developed regions. Climate change and environmental degradation, including soil salinization from intensive irrigation, contributed to the decline of several Mesopotamian civilizations. When central authority weakened, the complex systems that supported urban life could quickly break down, leading to population decline and cultural regression. Despite these challenges, the legacy of Mesopotamian civilization extends far beyond the region where it originated. The innovations developed in the land between the rivers, including writing, law codes, urban planning, and complex government structures, spread throughout the ancient world and continue to influence human society today. The epic literature of Mesopotamia inspired later writers and storytellers, while Mesopotamian religious concepts influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge developed by Mesopotamian scholars provided the foundation for later scientific advances in Greece, the Islamic world, and beyond. The story of Mesopotamian civilization reveals both the potential and the perils of complex urban society. The ability to organize large numbers of people for common purposes enabled achievements that would have been impossible for smaller, simpler communities. The development of writing preserved human knowledge and culture in ways that had never been possible before. The creation of legal systems provided frameworks for justice and social order that could govern diverse populations. Yet the same complexity that enabled these achievements also created new forms of inequality, conflict, and vulnerability that would challenge human societies throughout history. As we examine the rise and evolution of Mesopotamian civilization, we see the emergence of patterns that would characterize urban societies throughout history. The tension between individual freedom and social order, the challenge of governing diverse populations, the need to balance economic growth with environmental sustainability, and the constant threat of warfare and political instability are themes that resonate across millennia. The solutions developed by Mesopotamian civilizations, while specific to their time and place, offer insights into the enduring challenges of human social organization. The innovations of Mesopotamian civilization set the stage for the development of other great civilizations throughout the ancient world. The writing systems, legal codes, urban planning techniques, and governmental structures pioneered in Mesopotamia would be adapted and refined by later civilizations, creating a foundation for the complex societies that would dominate the ancient world. As we turn our attention to ancient Egypt, we will see how another great river valley civilization built upon these Mesopotamian innovations while developing its own unique solutions to the challenges of complex urban society. Along the banks of the Nile River, in the northeastern corner of Africa, another of humanity's great civilizations took root and flourished for over 3,000 years. Ancient Egypt, with its magnificent pyramids, mysterious hieroglyphs, and powerful pharaohs, captured the imagination of the ancient world and continues to fascinate us today. Yet behind the grandeur and mystique lay a sophisticated society that made fundamental contributions to human knowledge, art, architecture, and governance. The very longevity of Egyptian civilization, spanning more than 30 centuries of continuous cultural development, testifies to the remarkable stability and adaptability of the institutions and practices that the ancient Egyptians created. The Nile River was the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization, providing the water, fertile soil, and transportation network that made complex urban society possible in an otherwise harsh desert environment. Unlike the unpredictable flooding of Mesopotamian rivers, the Nile's annual flood cycle was remarkably regular, rising each summer to deposit nutrient-rich silt across the river valley before receding to reveal fertile fields ready for planting. This predictability allowed Egyptian farmers to develop sophisticated agricultural techniques and enabled the civilization to support a large population with relative stability. The Egyptians developed a calendar based on the Nile's flood cycle, dividing the year into 3 seasons corresponding to flooding, planting, and harvest, which became the foundation for their agricultural planning and religious observances. The geography of Egypt, with the Nile flowing northward through desert landscapes to the Mediterranean Sea, created natural boundaries that provided both protection and unity. The deserts to the east and west served as barriers against invasion, while the cataracts of the Upper Nile limited access from the south. This geographic isolation allowed Egyptian civilization to develop its distinctive characteristics with less external interference than other ancient civilizations experienced. At the same time, the Nile served as a highway connecting all parts of the country, facilitating communication, trade, and cultural exchange between Upper and Lower Egypt. The river's current carried boats northward toward the Mediterranean, while prevailing winds allowed vessels to sail southward against the current, creating an efficient transportation system that unified the entire length of the country. The unification of Egypt under the first pharaoh, traditionally identified as Narmer or Menes, around 3100 BCE, marked the beginning of one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. This political unification created the world's first large-scale nation-state, bringing together the diverse communities of the Nile Valley under a single ruler who claimed divine authority. The concept of the pharaoh as a god-king became central to Egyptian civilization, providing both religious legitimacy for political authority and a unifying symbol for the entire kingdom. The pharaoh was believed to be the earthly embodiment of the god Horus and the son of Ra, the sun god, giving him absolute authority over both temporal and spiritual matters. Egyptian writing, in the form of hieroglyphs, developed independently from Mesopotamian cuneiform and reflected the unique aesthetic and spiritual values of Egyptian culture. These beautiful symbols, carved into stone monuments and painted on papyrus scrolls, served not only as a means of communication, but as a form of art that decorated temples, tombs, and public buildings throughout Egypt. The Egyptian writing system was more complex than Mesopotamian cuneiform, incorporating pictographic, syllabic, and alphabetic elements that could express both concrete objects and abstract concepts with remarkable precision and beauty. The creation of papyrus from reeds that grew along the Nile provided Egyptians with an excellent writing material that was lighter and more portable than the clay tablets used in Mesopotamia. The construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, represents one of the most remarkable engineering achievements in human history. This massive structure, originally standing 481 feet tall and containing over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing several tons, required the coordinated labor of thousands of workers over more than 2 decades. The precision with which the pyramid was constructed, with sides aligned to the cardinal directions within fractions of a degree, demonstrates the advanced mathematical and engineering knowledge possessed by Egyptian architects and builders. The internal chambers and passages of the pyramid were designed with extraordinary precision, incorporating sophisticated understanding of structural engineering, astronomy, and geometry. The pyramids were not merely monuments to royal vanity, but reflected fundamental Egyptian beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the divine nature of kingship. Egyptians believed that the pharaoh's successful journey to the afterlife was essential for the continued prosperity and stability of the kingdom. The elaborate burial preparations, including mummification, the construction of massive tombs, and the provision of grave goods, represented significant investments of resources and labor that the entire society supported. These beliefs created a unique culture that was simultaneously focused on death and deeply committed to life and continuity. The process of mummification, which could take up to 70 days to complete, involved sophisticated understanding of anatomy and chemistry that contributed to Egyptian advances in medicine. Egyptian medicine achieved remarkable sophistication, with physicians who specialized in different areas of treatment and surgical procedures that would not be surpassed in some respects until modern times. The Edwin Smith Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, contain detailed descriptions of surgical techniques, anatomical knowledge, and medical treatments that demonstrate a scientific approach to healing. Egyptian physicians understood the importance of hygiene, developed effective treatments for various injuries and diseases, and even performed complex surgical procedures, including brain surgery and cataract removal. They created medical schools where knowledge was systematically taught and preserved, and they developed a sophisticated understanding of the circulatory system, recognizing the importance of the heart and pulse in maintaining health. The role of women in Egyptian society was notably progressive compared to many other ancient civilizations. Egyptian women could own property, initiate divorce proceedings, engage in business transactions, and serve in various professional roles, including as physicians and priestesses. Several women ruled Egypt as pharaohs in their own right, including Hatshepsut, who reigned for 22 years during the New Kingdom period and oversaw a time of unprecedented prosperity and architectural achievement. Hatshepsut's reign was marked by extensive building projects, successful trading expeditions, and peaceful relations with neighboring kingdoms, demonstrating that female rulers could be as effective as their male counterparts. The goddess Isis, one of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon, represented the ideal of feminine power and wisdom and was worshipped throughout the Mediterranean world. Egyptian art and architecture developed distinctive styles that remained remarkably consistent throughout the civilization's long history. The characteristic Egyptian artistic conventions, including the combination of profile and frontal views in human figures, the use of hierarchical scale to indicate importance, and the emphasis on eternal and idealized forms rather than realistic representation, reflected deep spiritual beliefs about the nature of reality and the afterlife. Egyptian artists and craftspeople achieved extraordinary skill in working with stone, metal, wood, and other materials, creating works of art that continue to inspire admiration today. The consistency of Egyptian artistic style across thousands of years reflects the conservative nature of Egyptian culture and the importance placed on maintaining traditional forms and practices. The Egyptian calendar, based on careful observation of astronomical phenomena, was one of the most accurate in the ancient world. Egyptian astronomers tracked the movements of stars and planets, developed methods for predicting the annual Nile flood, and created a calendar system that influenced later civilizations, including the Romans. The alignment of many Egyptian monuments with astronomical phenomena demonstrates the integration of scientific observation with religious belief that characterized Egyptian culture. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, is aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions and incorporates astronomical alignments that reflect the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of celestial movements. Trade played a crucial role in Egyptian prosperity, with Egyptian merchants establishing commercial relationships throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. Egypt's location at the crossroads between Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean made it a natural hub for international commerce. Egyptian goods, including grain, papyrus, linen, and gold, were highly prized throughout the ancient world, while Egypt imported cedar wood from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, and exotic goods from Nubia and the land of Punt. These trade relationships not only brought wealth to Egypt, but also facilitated cultural exchange and the spread of Egyptian influence throughout the region. Egyptian trading expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, possibly located in modern-day Somalia or Ethiopia, brought back incense, gold, ivory, and exotic animals that were highly valued in Egyptian society. The New Kingdom period, from approximately 1550 to 1070 BCE, marked the height of Egyptian power and cultural achievement. During this era, pharaohs like Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Ramesses II expanded Egyptian territory through military conquest, established diplomatic relationships with other great powers, and commissioned some of the most impressive architectural projects in Egyptian history. The temples at Karnak and Luxor, the rock-cut temples at Abu Simbel, and the elaborate tombs in the Valley of the Kings demonstrate the wealth, power, and artistic sophistication of New Kingdom Egypt. Thutmose III conducted 17 military campaigns that extended Egyptian control as far as the Euphrates River, while Ramesses II built more monuments and temples than any other pharaoh in Egyptian history. The religious revolution of Akhenaten, who ruled from approximately 1353 to 1336 BCE, represents one of the most fascinating episodes in Egyptian history. This pharaoh attempted to replace Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion with the worship of a single deity, the Aten or sun disk, and moved the capital from Thebes to a new city called Akhetitan. While this religious experiment was ultimately unsuccessful and was reversed by Akhenaten's successors, It demonstrates the dynamic nature of Egyptian culture and the ongoing evolution of religious and philosophical thought. Akhenaten's reign also saw revolutionary changes in Egyptian art, with more naturalistic representations of the royal family and a departure from traditional artistic conventions that had remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. The gradual decline of Egyptian independence began during the late period, as the civilization faced increasing pressure from foreign powers, including the Assyrians, Persians, and eventually the Greeks and Romans. However, even under foreign rule, Egyptian culture maintained its distinctive character and continued to influence the broader Mediterranean world. The Ptolemaic dynasty, established by one of Alexander the Great's generals, ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries and created a unique blend of Greek and Egyptian culture that produced remarkable achievements in scholarship, science, and art. The Ptolemies built upon Egypt's traditional strengths while incorporating Greek intellectual traditions, creating a cultural synthesis that would influence the entire Mediterranean world. The Library of Alexandria, established during the Ptolemaic period, became the greatest center of learning in the ancient world, attracting scholars from throughout the Mediterranean and preserving texts from many different cultures and civilizations. This institution represented the culmination of Egypt's long tradition of learning and scholarship, building upon thousands of years of accumulated knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other fields. The work of scholars at Alexandria, including Euclid, Eratosthenes, and Ptolemy, would influence human knowledge for centuries to come. The library housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls and manuscripts, making it the largest collection of written knowledge in the ancient world. The impact of Egyptian civilization on the broader ancient world was profound and lasting. Egyptian artistic styles influenced Greek and Roman art. Egyptian religious concepts contributed to the development of various mystery religions, and Egyptian mathematical and astronomical knowledge provided foundations for later scientific advances. The concept of divine kingship, first fully developed in Egypt, would be adopted by many later civilizations and continue to influence political thought throughout history. Egyptian architectural techniques, particularly in stone construction and monumental building, influenced construction practices throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The preservation of Egyptian culture through mummification, tomb paintings, and hieroglyphic inscriptions has provided modern scholars with an unusually detailed picture of ancient Egyptian life. From the elaborate burial preparations of pharaohs to the daily activities of ordinary people, Egyptian art and writing offer insights into the beliefs, values, and practices of one of humanity's most successful civilizations. The decipherment of hieroglyphs by Jean-François Champollion in the 19th century opened a window into this ancient world that continues to yield new discoveries and insights. Archaeological excavations continue to reveal new aspects of Egyptian civilization, from the tombs of previously unknown pharaohs to the remains of ordinary villages that show how common people lived and worked. The legacy of ancient Egypt extends far beyond its contributions to art, architecture, and learning. The Egyptian achievement in creating a stable, prosperous civilization that endured for over 3 millennia demonstrates the potential for human societies to develop sustainable relationships with their environment and to create institutions capable of preserving and transmitting culture across generations. The Egyptian emphasis on continuity and tradition, balanced with the ability to adapt and innovate when necessary, offers lessons for modern societies facing their own challenges of sustainability and cultural preservation. The remarkable longevity of Egyptian civilization shows that human societies can maintain their essential character while adapting to changing circumstances over very long periods of time. As we conclude our examination of ancient Egypt, we see a civilization that successfully balanced stability with innovation, tradition with adaptation, and local identity with international engagement. The achievements of Egyptian civilization in art, architecture, science, medicine, and governance provided foundations that would support the development of later civilizations throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The story of Egypt demonstrates both the potential for human achievement when favorable conditions are combined with cultural innovation and the importance of strong institutions in maintaining civilization across centuries of change and challenge. The 3 great themes we have explored: human evolution and the agricultural revolution, the rise of Mesopotamian civilization, and the flowering of ancient Egypt represent the foundational chapters in the story of human civilization. From the first tentative steps of our earliest ancestors to the magnificent achievements of the pharaohs, we see a continuous thread of human ingenuity, adaptability, and ambition that would continue to drive the development of increasingly complex and sophisticated societies throughout history. These early civilizations established patterns of social organization, technological innovation, and cultural development that would influence human societies for thousands of years to come, creating the foundation upon which all subsequent human achievement would be built. The legacy of ancient Egypt provides a bridge to our next great chapter in human civilization, the remarkable flowering of ancient Greece. As Egyptian power gradually waned in the first millennium before the Common Era, a new civilization was emerging across the Mediterranean that would fundamentally transform human thought, politics, and culture in ways that continue to influence our world today. Ancient Greece represents perhaps the most extraordinary intellectual and cultural revolution in human history. Unlike the great river valley civilizations that preceded it, Greek civilization developed not around a single great river or unified empire, but across a scattered archipelago of islands and peninsulas where independent states flourished in relative isolation while maintaining connections through trade, warfare, and shared cultural traditions. This unique geographic setting created conditions that fostered unprecedented experimentation in politics, philosophy, art, and science. The rugged landscape of Greece, with its countless islands scattered across the Aegean Sea and mountainous peninsulas jutting into the Mediterranean, shaped not only the physical development of Greek civilization, but also its distinctive character. The sea became a highway rather than a barrier, connecting far-flung communities, while the mountains created natural boundaries that encouraged political independence. This geography meant that Greek civilization would develop as a collection of small, fiercely independent communities rather than as a single unified empire like those of Egypt or Mesopotamia. The story of Greek civilization begins in the mists of the Bronze Age, when the Mycenaean civilization dominated much of what would later become Greece. These early Greeks, whose exploits were later immortalized in the epic poems of Homer, built impressive fortified palaces and engaged in extensive trade networks throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The great citadel of Mycenae, with its massive stone walls and sophisticated administrative systems, reveals a complex society capable of organizing large-scale construction projects and maintaining detailed records of economic transactions. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pylos and Tiryns shows that Mycenaean civilization possessed advanced military technology, sophisticated artistic traditions, and complex social hierarchies. The famous Linear B tablets deciphered in the 20th century reveal a bureaucratic system that carefully tracked everything from livestock inventories to religious offerings, suggesting a highly organized state apparatus that rivaled contemporary civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia. However, around 1200 years before the Common Era, Mycenaean civilization collapsed with startling suddenness, ushering in what historians call the Greek Dark Ages, a period of reduced population, limited trade, and cultural decline that lasted for several centuries. The causes of this collapse remain mysterious, though scholars have proposed various explanations, including natural disasters, internal warfare, invasion by the mysterious Sea Peoples, or some combination of these factors. What is clear is that the sophisticated palace-based civilization of the Bronze Age disappeared almost entirely, leaving behind only scattered rural communities with much simpler social and economic systems. During these dark centuries, many of the achievements of Mycenaean civilization were lost or forgotten. The art of writing disappeared entirely, monumental architecture ceased, and long-distance trade networks collapsed. Population declined dramatically, and many previously inhabited sites were abandoned. Yet this period of apparent decline also contained the seeds of future greatness. As Greek communities gradually developed new forms of social organization and cultural expression that would prove far more dynamic and influential than their Bronze Age predecessors. From this dark age emerged a new form of Greek civilization that would prove far more dynamic and influential than its Bronze Age predecessor. Beginning around the 8th century before the Common Era, Greek communities began to coalesce into the distinctive political units known as city, states, or polis. Each polis was an independent political entity, consisting of a central urban area and its surrounding agricultural territory, typically small enough that citizens could know each other personally and participate directly in political life. The development of the Greek city-state system was facilitated by Greece's mountainous geography, which naturally divided the region into small, defensible valleys and coastal plains. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where geography encouraged the development of large, centralized kingdoms, Greek geography fostered the emergence of numerous small, independent communities that jealously guarded their autonomy while sharing common language, religion, and cultural traditions. The typical Greek polis centered around an acropolis, a fortified hilltop that served both as a refuge during times of war and as the location for the community's most important temples. Below the Acropolis lay the Agora, the central marketplace and gathering place where citizens conducted business, exchanged news, and participated in political discussions. This physical layout reflected the dual nature of Greek civilization, combining practical concerns for defense and commerce with a deep commitment to religious observance and civic participation. The emergence of the polis system coincided with a remarkable revival of Greek culture and population. The development of the Greek alphabet, adapted from Phoenician writing systems around the 8th century before the Common Era, restored literacy to Greek civilization and enabled the preservation and transmission of cultural traditions. This new writing system, which included vowels for the first time in Mediterranean history, proved remarkably flexible and efficient, contributing to the rapid spread of literacy and the development of Greek literature. The 8th century also witnessed the composition of the great epic poems attributed to Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which provided Greeks with a shared cultural heritage and common set of values. These poems, originally composed for oral recitation, celebrated heroic virtues like courage, honor, and loyalty, while also exploring complex themes about the relationship between mortals and gods, the meaning of suffering, and the importance of achieving lasting fame through noble deeds. Among the hundreds of city-states that emerged during this period, Athens would emerge as perhaps the most significant in terms of its contributions to human civilization. The Athenian experiment in democracy represents one of the most remarkable political innovations in human history. Unlike modern representative democracies, Athenian democracy was a direct democracy in which eligible citizens participated personally in making political decisions. This system emerged gradually during the 6th and 5th centuries before the Common Era through the reforms of leaders like Solon and Cleisthenes, who systematically dismantled aristocratic privilege and expanded political participation. The path to Athenian democracy was neither smooth nor inevitable. In the 7th and 6th centuries before the Common Era, Athens, like many Greek city-states, was dominated by aristocratic families who monopolized political power and economic resources. Growing tensions between rich and poor threatened to tear the community apart, leading to the appointment of Solon as archon with extraordinary powers to reform the constitution around 594 before the Common Era. Solon's reforms addressed economic inequality by canceling debts and prohibiting the enslavement of Athenian citizens for debt, while also creating new political institutions that gave ordinary citizens a greater voice in government. He established a system of property classes that determined political privileges, ensuring that wealth rather than birth would be the primary criterion for political participation. Though these reforms did not create full democracy, they established important precedents for broader political participation and constitutional government. The decisive step toward democracy came with the reforms of Cleisthenes around 508 before the Common Era. Cleisthenes reorganized the Athenian citizen body into new tribal units that cut across traditional kinship and regional loyalties, creating a more unified civic identity. He established the Council of 500, chosen by lot from all citizens, which prepared business for the popular assembly and supervised the administration of the state. Most importantly, he instituted the practice of ostracism, which allowed the citizen body to exile political leaders who seemed to threaten democratic institutions. The Athenian democratic system was far from perfect by modern standards. participation was limited to adult male citizens, excluding women, slaves, and foreign residents who together comprised the majority of the population. Scholars estimate that only about 10 to 15% of Athens' total population enjoyed full political rights. Nevertheless, for those who were included, Athenian democracy provided an unprecedented opportunity for ordinary citizens to participate directly in governing their community. Citizens gathered regularly in the ecclesia, the popular assembly which met on the Paix Hill overlooking the city. Any citizen could speak in the assembly, propose legislation, or question public officials. Decisions were made by majority vote after open debate, and citizens served in turn as jurors in the law courts and as members of the Council of 500. This system required enormous commitment from citizens who might spend several days each month participating in various aspects of democratic governance. The intensity of civic participation in Athens created a unique political culture that valued public service, rhetorical skill, and informed debate about public policy. Citizens were expected to be knowledgeable about military affairs, finance, foreign relations, and domestic policy. The ability to speak persuasively in public became a crucial skill, leading to the development of sophisticated technique of rhetoric and argumentation that would influence education and politics throughout the Western world. This democratic participation extended beyond formal political institutions to encompass a broader culture of public engagement and intellectual inquiry. Athenians developed a tradition of open debate and rational argument that encouraged citizens to question traditional authorities and think critically about fundamental questions of justice, morality, and the good life. This intellectual culture provided the foundation for the extraordinary flowering of Greek philosophy, literature, and science that would follow. The Persian Wars of the early 5th century, before the Common Era, provided a crucial catalyst for the development of Greek civilization, and particularly for the emergence of Athens as a major power. When the vast Persian Empire, which had conquered much of the known world from India to Egypt, turned its attention to the Greek city-states, it seemed impossible that these small, divided communities could resist such overwhelming force. The Persian Empire under Darius I was the largest and most powerful state the world had yet seen, encompassing millions of square miles and countless different peoples united under a single imperial administration. Persian armies had conquered the great kingdoms of Lydia and Babylon, subjugated the Greek cities of Asia Minor, and established Persian authority from the Indus River to the shores of the Black Sea. When Persian forces crossed into Europe and demanded submission from the Greek city-states, most observers expected swift Persian victory. However, the Greeks managed not only to survive the Persian onslaught but to defeat it decisively, first at the Battle of Marathon in 490 before the Common Era, and then in the great naval victory at Salamis 10 years later. At Marathon, a force of about 10,000 Athenians and their Plataean allies defeated a much larger Persian army, demonstrating that Greek hoplites fighting in close formation could overcome the more lightly armed Persian infantry. The victory provided enormous encouragement to Greek resistance and established Athens as the leading defender of Greek freedom. The Second Persian invasion under Xerxes in 480, before the Common Era, posed an even greater threat, as Persian forces reportedly numbered in the hundreds of thousands and included contingents from throughout the Persian Empire. The heroic stand of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, though ultimately unsuccessful, bought time for Greek forces to prepare for the decisive naval battle at Salamis. The victory at Salamis, won through the tactical genius of the Athenian admiral Themistocles, destroyed Persian naval supremacy in the Aegean and forced Xerxes to retreat to Asia with much of his army. The following year, Greek forces won a decisive victory at Plataea that ended the Persian threat to mainland Greece. These victories had profound consequences for the subsequent development of Greek civilization. These victories had profound consequences for Greek civilization. They demonstrated that free citizens fighting for their own communities could defeat the subjects of a despotic empire, providing powerful validation for the Greek political ideal of liberty and self-governance. The victories also established Athens as the leading naval power in the Aegean, setting the stage for the creation of the Athenian Empire and the remarkable cultural achievements of the 5th century before the Common Era. The aftermath of the Persian Wars saw the formation of the Delian League, an alliance of Greek states led by Athens and dedicated to continuing the war against Persia. What began as a voluntary alliance gradually evolved into an Athenian empire as Athens used its naval supremacy to dominate its allies and extract tribute to fund its own projects. The wealth flowing into Athens from this empire provided the economic foundation for the extraordinary cultural achievements of the 5th century. The period following the Persian Wars, often called the Golden Age of Athens, witnessed an unprecedented flowering of human creativity and intellectual achievement. Under the leadership of Pericles, who dominated Athenian politics for over 30 years in the mid-5th century, Athens became not only a major political and military power, but also the cultural center of the Greek world. Pericles' vision of Athens as the school of Greece inspired ambitious projects in architecture, sculpture, drama, and philosophy that would establish lasting standards of artistic and intellectual excellence. The wealth flowing into Athens from its empire funded ambitious building projects, most notably the construction of the Parthenon and other temples on the Acropolis that remain among the world's most admired architectural achievements. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, represented the culmination of Greek architectural development, combining perfect proportions with exquisite decorative sculpture. The building program on the Acropolis employed hundreds of craftsmen and artists, creating a showcase of Athenian power and cultural sophistication that was visible from throughout Attica. The Parthenon's design embodied mathematical principles of proportion and harmony that Greek architects had developed over centuries of experimentation. The building appears perfectly regular to the human eye, but actually incorporates subtle curves and adjustments that compensate for optical illusions and create an impression of ideal geometric perfection. The sculptural decorations, created under the supervision of Phidias, depicted scenes from Athenian mythology and history that celebrated the city's achievements, while also conveying deeper messages about the relationship between human excellence and divine favor. More importantly, this period saw the emergence of the great Athenian tragedians Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, whose plays explored fundamental questions about human nature, divine justice, and the relationship between individual desires and social obligations. These dramatic works, performed at religious festivals before audiences that included the entire citizen body, served not only as entertainment, but as a form of civic education that encouraged citizens to think deeply about moral and political questions. Athenian tragedy represented a unique art form that combined poetry, music, dance, and spectacle in service of serious moral and philosophical inquiry. The great tragedies dealt with universal themes of human suffering, moral choice, and the limits of human knowledge, using stories from mythology to explore contemporary concerns about politics, religion, and social values. Aeschylus pioneered the form with works like the Oresteia trilogy, which traced the evolution of justice from personal vengeance to institutional law. Sophocles perfected the psychological portrayal of character in plays like Oedipus the King, which explored the tragic consequences of human pride and the limits of human understanding. Euripides pushed the boundaries of the form with works that questioned traditional values and explored the psychology of characters caught in impossible situations. The Festival of Dionysus, where these tragedies were performed, became a crucial institution of Athenian democracy. Citizens gathered for several days each year to watch dramatic competitions that addressed the most serious questions facing their community. The selection of plays, the awarding of prizes, and the public discussion that followed these performances created a shared cultural experience that reinforced democratic values and encouraged critical thinking about public issues. The same period witnessed the development of historical writing as a distinct intellectual discipline. Herodotus, often called the father of history, wrote the first systematic account of past events based on careful investigation of sources and eyewitness testimony. His account of the Persian Wars established history as a form of rational inquiry into human affairs rather than simply a collection of myths and legends. Herodotus traveled extensively throughout the known world, interviewing participants in historical events and collecting information about different cultures and customs. His histories combined narrative skill with anthropological curiosity, providing not only an account of the Persian Wars, but also a comprehensive survey of the peoples and cultures of the ancient world. His work established important principles of historical methodology, including the importance of evaluating sources, considering multiple perspectives, and distinguishing between reliable and unreliable testimony. Thucydides, who chronicled the devastating Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, further refined historical methodology and provided penetrating insights into the dynamics of power, ambition, and moral decline in political communities. Unlike Herodotus, who included stories about divine intervention and supernatural events, Thucydides focused exclusively on human causes and rational analysis of political and military developments. His work established history as a rigorous discipline based on careful analysis of evidence and logical reasoning about cause and effect. Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian War provided not only a detailed narrative of military and political events, but also profound insights into the nature of political power, the psychology of leadership, and the moral challenges facing democratic societies. His analysis of the plague that devastated Athens, the brutal suppression of the Mytilenean revolt, and the disastrous Sicilian expedition revealed how war and imperial ambition could corrupt even democratic societies and lead to moral and political collapse. Perhaps most significantly, this period saw the emergence of philosophy as a systematic form of rational inquiry into fundamental questions about reality, knowledge, and ethics. The great Athenian philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle developed methods of logical argument and systematic investigation that would provide the foundation for all subsequent Western intellectual traditions. Socrates pioneered the method of critical questioning that bears his name, challenging his fellow citizens to examine their beliefs and assumptions about justice, virtue, and the good life. Unlike the sophists, who taught rhetorical techniques for winning arguments regardless of truth, Socrates insisted that the pursuit of wisdom required rigorous self-examination and the admission of ignorance about fundamental questions. His method of questioning, demonstrated in the dialogues of Plato, revealed the contradictions and confusions in commonly accepted beliefs and encouraged deeper reflection about moral and philosophical issues. Socrates' commitment to philosophical inquiry ultimately cost him his life when he was executed by the Athenian democracy in 399 before the Common Era on charges of corrupting the youth and introducing new gods. His death became a powerful symbol of the tension between philosophical inquiry and political authority, while his example inspired subsequent generations of philosophers to continue the search for truth regardless of social or political pressures. Plato developed these insights into a comprehensive philosophical system that addressed questions ranging from the nature of reality to the ideal organization of political communities. His theory of forms provided a metaphysical foundation for understanding the relationship between the material world of appearances and the eternal realm of perfect ideas. His Republic outlined a vision of an ideal state governed by philosopher, kings who possessed both the wisdom to understand truth and the virtue to rule justly. Plato's Academy, established around 387 before the Common Era, became the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. For over 900 years, the Academy served as a center for philosophical and mathematical research that attracted students from throughout the Mediterranean world. The curriculum combined mathematical studies with philosophical inquiry, reflecting Plato's belief that understanding mathematical relationships provided essential preparation for grasping higher philosophical truths. Aristotle, Plato's student, created systematic approaches to logic, ethics, politics, and natural science that would dominate Western thought for over 2,000 years. Unlike Plato, who emphasized the world of eternal forms, Aristotle focused on understanding the natural world through careful observation and logical analysis. His works on logic established the principles of valid reasoning that remained standard until the development of modern symbolic logic. His ethical writings explored the nature of human flourishing and the role of virtue in achieving happiness. His political philosophy analyzed different forms of government and the conditions necessary for political stability and justice. Aristotle's approach to natural science, while later superseded by modern methods, established important principles of systematic observation and classification that advanced human understanding of the natural world. His biological works, based on careful dissection and observation of hundreds of species, provided the most comprehensive account of animal life available until the modern period. His physics and astronomy, though later proven incorrect in many details, represented serious attempts to explain natural phenomena through rational principles rather than supernatural causes. The intellectual achievements of classical Athens were paralleled by remarkable innovations in art and architecture. Greek artists developed techniques of realistic representation that captured the human form with unprecedented accuracy and beauty. The evolution of Greek sculpture from the rigid, stylized figures of the archaic period to the naturalistic masterpieces of the classical period demonstrates a continuous process of artistic experimentation and refinement that established new standards of aesthetic excellence. The classical orders of architecture developed during this period established principles of proportion and harmony that would influence building design throughout the Western world. The Doric, Ionic, and later Corinthian orders provided systematic approaches to architectural design that balanced structural requirements with aesthetic considerations. These architectural principles, codified in treatises like Vitruvius De Architectura, remained influential throughout the Roman period and were revived during the Renaissance to become fundamental elements of Western architectural tradition. Greek sculptors like Phidias created works that combined technical mastery with profound spiritual and aesthetic vision, establishing ideals of beauty and artistic excellence that continue to inspire artists today. The sculptures of the Parthenon, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, and other masterpieces of classical art demonstrated the Greek belief that art should represent not just physical appearance, but ideal forms that embodied perfect beauty and moral excellence. The development of Greek pottery painting during this period also reached extraordinary heights of artistic achievement. Athenian painters created narrative scenes on vases and other ceramic objects that provide invaluable evidence about Greek daily life, mythology, and artistic techniques. The evolution from black figure to red figure pottery painting demonstrates the continuous innovation and refinement that characterized Greek artistic development. However, the very success of Athens also contained the seeds of its eventual decline. The wealth and power that made possible the cultural achievements of the Golden Age also bred arrogance and imperial ambition that ultimately led to conflict with other Greek city-states. The transformation of the Delian League from a voluntary alliance into an Athenian empire created resentment among other Greek communities and provided Sparta with allies in its eventual confrontation with Athens. The Peloponnesian War, fought between Athens and Sparta and their respective allies from 431 to 404 before the Common Era, devastated much of Greece and marked the beginning of the end of the classical city-state system. Thucydides' account of this conflict reveals how imperial ambition, democratic decision-making under pressure, and the moral corruption that accompanies prolonged warfare combined to destroy the very civilization that had produced such remarkable achievements. The war began as a conflict between two very different visions of Greek civilization, with Athens representing democratic innovation, cultural achievement, and imperial expansion, while Sparta embodied traditional values, military discipline, and resistance to change. The initial phases of the war seemed to favor Athens, with its superior naval power and financial resources, but the plague that struck Athens in 429 before the Common Era killed perhaps 1/3 of the population, including Pericles himself, and severely weakened Athenian morale and capabilities. The disastrous Sicilian expedition of 415 to 413 before the Common Era marked the turning point of the war. Athenian ambitions to conquer Sicily and expand their empire westward led to the commitment of enormous resources to a poorly planned campaign that ended in complete disaster. The loss of 2 large fleets and thousands of soldiers fatally weakened Athens and encouraged its enemies to continue the war with Persian financial support. Sparta, Athens' great rival, represented a very different model of Greek civilization. Where Athens emphasized individual freedom, intellectual inquiry, and cultural achievement, Sparta created a highly disciplined military society focused entirely on warfare and collective solidarity. Spartan citizens underwent rigorous military training from childhood and lived in a state of constant readiness for war. This system produced perhaps the most effective military force in the ancient world, but at the cost of severely limiting individual freedom and cultural development. The Spartan system, known as the agoge, removed boys from their families at age 7 and subjected them to 20 years of military training designed to create perfect soldiers. The training emphasized physical toughness, military skills, and absolute obedience to authority. Spartan citizens were forbidden to engage in trade or crafts, instead devoting themselves entirely to military service while their economic needs were met by the labor of helots, a subjugated population that vastly outnumbered the citizen body. The Spartan constitution, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, created a mixed system that balanced monarchical, aristocratic, and democratic elements. 2 hereditary kings shared executive authority, while the Gerousia, a council of elders, exercised judicial and legislative functions. The ephors, elected annually by the citizen body, supervised the kings and enforced the laws. This system provided stability and military effectiveness, but discouraged innovation and cultural development. The contrast between Athens and Sparta illustrates the diversity and creativity of Greek civilization. Unlike the more uniform civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, Greece encompassed a wide variety of political systems, cultural practices, and intellectual approaches. Some city-states, like Athens, emphasized democracy and individual achievement. Others, like Sparta, prioritized collective discipline and military excellence. Still others experimented with different forms of government and social organization, creating a laboratory for political and social innovation that would provide lessons for future civilizations. The Peloponnesian War ultimately weakened all of the Greek city-states and paved the way for conquest by Macedonia, a semi-Greek kingdom to the north. Under Philip II and his son Alexander, Macedonia would unite Greece and launch the conquests that would spread Greek culture throughout the known world. Philip's military innovations, particularly the development of the Macedonian phalanx and the integration of cavalry with infantry, created the most effective military force of its time and enabled the conquest of Greece despite fierce resistance from many city-states. Alexander's campaigns, which extended from Egypt to India, created a vast cosmopolitan civilization that blended Greek culture with local traditions, establishing what historians call the Hellenistic world. In just 13 years, Alexander conquered the entire Persian Empire and extended Macedonian rule to the Indus River, creating the largest empire the world had yet seen. Though his empire fragmented after his death in 323 before the Common Era, the cultural synthesis he initiated would influence the development of civilization throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia for centuries to come. The Hellenistic period, lasting from Alexander's death in 323 before the Common Era until the Roman conquest of the Eastern Mediterranean, saw Greek culture spread far beyond its original homeland. Great cities like Alexandria in Egypt and Antioch in Syria became centers of Greek learning and culture, while Greek became the common language of trade, diplomacy, and intellectual discourse throughout much of the civilized world. This cultural diffusion helped preserve and transmit Greek achievements in philosophy, science, and the arts to future generations. Alexandria, founded by Alexander in 331 before the Common Era, became the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. The famous Library of Alexandria, established by the Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, attempted to collect all human knowledge in a single institution. Scholars estimate that the library contained between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, representing virtually all the literature, philosophy, and scientific knowledge of the ancient world. The Associated Museum provided facilities for research and teaching that attracted scholars from throughout the Mediterranean. The scientific achievements of the Hellenistic period were particularly remarkable. Building on foundations laid during the classical period, Greek scientists and mathematicians made fundamental discoveries that would not be surpassed for over 1,000 years. The combination of Greek theoretical approaches with the practical knowledge and resources of the great Hellenistic kingdoms created unprecedented opportunities for scientific research and technological development. Euclid systematized geometry into the logical framework that still bears his name. His Elements, composed around 300 before the Common Era, provided a comprehensive treatment of geometric principles that remained the standard textbook for over 2,000 years. Euclid's method of proceeding from basic axioms through logical proofs to complex theorems established a model of mathematical reasoning that influenced not only mathematics, but all forms of systematic inquiry. Archimedes made groundbreaking discoveries in physics and mathematics while also developing practical applications like improved siege engines and water pumps. His work on hydrostatics, the principle of the lever, and the calculation of areas and volumes represented major advances in both theoretical understanding and practical application. His famous cry of "Eureka!" upon discovering the principle of water displacement illustrates the excitement and satisfaction that accompanied scientific discovery in the Hellenistic world. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy using only simple geometric principles and careful observation. By measuring the different angles of shadows cast at noon on the summer solstice in Alexandria and Seen, he was able to calculate the Earth's circumference to within about 10% of the correct value. This achievement demonstrated the power of Greek mathematical methods and provided concrete evidence for the spherical shape of the Earth. Hipparchus made fundamental contributions to astronomy by creating the first comprehensive star catalog, discovering the precession of the equinoxes, and developing trigonometric methods for astronomical calculations. His work provided the foundation for the later astronomical system of Ptolemy, which would dominate Western astronomy for over 1,000 years. In medicine, Greek physicians like Hippocrates established the principle that disease had natural rather than supernatural causes and developed systematic approaches to diagnosis and treatment based on careful observation of symptoms and outcomes. The Hippocratic Oath, with its emphasis on professional ethics and the physician's duty to do no harm, established principles of medical practice that continue to guide physicians today. Hellenistic physicians made significant advances in anatomy and surgery by conducting systematic dissections of human bodies, a practice that had been forbidden in earlier periods. Herophilus and Erasistratus, working in Alexandria, made important discoveries about the circulatory and nervous systems that advanced medical understanding considerably. Their work established medicine as a systematic discipline based on empirical observation and rational analysis rather than traditional beliefs and supernatural explanations. Greek achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy provided essential foundations for later scientific development. The Greek emphasis on logical reasoning, systematic observation, and mathematical analysis established methodological approaches that would prove essential for the eventual emergence of modern science. Even when specific Greek theories were later proven incorrect, the intellectual methods they developed remained valuable tools for investigating the natural world. The influence of Greek civilization extended far beyond science and philosophy to encompass virtually every aspect of human culture. Greek literature established genres and artistic conventions that continue to influence writers today. The epic poems of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, created archetypal stories of heroism, adventure, and the human condition that have been retold and reinterpreted countless times throughout history. The Iliad, with its portrayal of the Trojan War, explores themes of honor, duty, friendship, and the tragic consequences of pride and anger. The character of Achilles embodies the heroic ideal while also revealing the destructive potential of unchecked emotion. The Odyssey presents a different kind of heroism in the figure of Odysseus, whose intelligence, perseverance, and loyalty enable him to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles and return home after 20 years of wandering. Greek drama established the basic forms of tragedy and comedy that remain central to theatrical tradition. The works of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides continue to be performed and studied today, while the comedies of Aristophanes provide insight into the political and social concerns of classical Athens. The dramatic festivals of Athens created a model for using theater as a form of public education and cultural expression that has influenced theatrical traditions throughout the world. Greek political thought, particularly the works of Plato and Aristotle, provided systematic analysis of different forms of government and the principles of just rule that would influence political theorists for centuries to come. Plato's Republic, despite its idealistic character, raised fundamental questions about the nature of justice, the role of education in society, and the relationship between individual virtue and political order that remain relevant to contemporary political discussion. Aristotle's Politics provided a more empirical approach to political analysis, examining the actual constitutions of 158 Greek city-states and analyzing the conditions that promote political stability and effective governance. His classification of governments into monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, along with their corresponding corrupted forms of tyranny, oligarchy, and mob rule, provided a framework for political analysis that remained influential throughout the medieval and early modern periods. The Greek concept of citizenship, with its emphasis on active participation in public life and civic responsibility, established ideals of political engagement that continue to shape democratic theory and practice. The Greek notion that citizens should be actively involved in governing their communities, rather than simply obeying the commands of rulers, provided a foundation for later democratic movements and continues to influence contemporary discussions about civic education and political participation. Perhaps most fundamentally, Greek civilization established the principle that human beings could use reason and systematic inquiry to understand the world around them and improve their condition. This confidence in human rational capacity, combined with respect for individual dignity and freedom, created intellectual and cultural foundations that would prove essential for the development of Western civilization. The Greek commitment to rational inquiry led to the development of systematic approaches to understanding the natural world, human society, and moral questions that would influence intellectual development for centuries to come. The Greek emphasis on debate, discussion, and the examination of competing ideas established traditions of intellectual freedom and critical thinking that remain essential elements of educational and scholarly practice. The transition from the Greek to the Roman world marked another crucial turning point in the development of human civilization. While Rome would eventually conquer and politically dominate the Greek world, the Romans were profoundly influenced by Greek culture and served as the primary vehicle for transmitting Greek achievements to later generations. The story of Rome represents both the culmination of ancient political achievement and the beginning of a new phase in human social organization. Rome began as a small city-state in central Italy, not unlike the Greek Polias in its origins and early development. According to traditional accounts, Rome was founded in 753 before the Common Era by Romulus, though archaeological evidence suggests that the site was occupied by various Italian tribes for centuries before the emergence of a unified Roman community. The early development of Rome was influenced by contact with Greek colonies in southern Italy and with the Etruscan civilization to the north, which provided models for urban development, religious practices, and political organization. However, unlike Greece, which remained divided into competing city-states, Rome gradually expanded to unite first Italy and eventually the entire Mediterranean world under a single political system. This expansion was facilitated by Rome's genius for practical organization, military innovation, and political adaptation that allowed it to incorporate diverse peoples and cultures into a unified imperial system. The early Roman Republic, established around 500 before the Common Era after the expulsion of the last king, created a mixed constitution that balanced different elements of society and prevented any single individual or group from monopolizing power. The Roman system included democratic elements, with popular assemblies that elected magistrates and voted on legislation, aristocratic elements in the form of the Senate, and monarchical elements in the executive authority of the consuls. The Roman constitution evolved gradually over centuries of practical experience, developing institutions and procedures that proved remarkably effective at managing the challenges of governing an expanding territory and increasingly diverse population. The system of checks and balances built into the Roman constitution, with its division of authority among different magistrates and institutions, provided a model for later constitutional systems and demonstrated the possibility of creating stable government without monarchy. This constitutional system proved remarkably effective at managing the challenges of governing an expanding territory and diverse population. Roman law, which developed over centuries of practical experience in governing different peoples and resolving disputes, created systematic principles of justice that could be applied consistently across the empire. The Roman legal tradition, with its emphasis on written law, due process, and individual rights, would provide essential foundations for later legal systems throughout Europe and beyond. The development of Roman law began with the 12 Tables, a written code established around 450 before the Common Era that provided basic legal principles accessible to all citizens. Over the following centuries, Roman jurists developed increasingly sophisticated legal concepts and procedures that addressed the complex challenges of governing a diverse empire. The distinction between jus civile, law applicable to Roman citizens, and jus gentium, law applicable to all peoples, provided a framework for legal development that could accommodate different cultural traditions while maintaining consistent principles of justice. Roman military organization and tactics were equally innovative and effective. The Roman legions, with their disciplined training, standardized equipment, and flexible tactical formations, proved superior to virtually every enemy they encountered. The Roman military system combined professional training with systematic organization in ways that created the most effective fighting force of the ancient world. The Roman legion evolved from the Greek phalanx system, but developed greater flexibility and adaptability through the use of smaller tactical units called maniples and later cohorts. Roman soldiers received extensive training in weapons use, engineering, and construction, making them effective not only in battle, but also in building roads, bridges, and fortifications that supported military operations and facilitated long-term occupation of conquered territories. More importantly, Rome's policy of incorporating conquered peoples into the Roman system, either as allies or eventually as citizens, created loyalty and stability that allowed the empire to expand and endure for centuries. Unlike many ancient empires that simply extracted tribute from conquered peoples, Rome offered pathways to full participation in Roman civilization that encouraged loyalty and reduced the likelihood of rebellion. The Roman approach to imperial expansion combined military conquest with systematic integration of conquered peoples into Roman institutions. Local elites were encouraged to adopt Roman customs and participate in Roman government, while Roman colonies established throughout the empire served as centers for spreading Roman culture and maintaining political control. This policy of gradual integration created a sense of shared identity and common purpose that held the empire together despite its enormous diversity. The Roman genius for practical organization extended to engineering and architecture as well. Roman engineers built roads, aqueducts, bridges, and buildings that demonstrated both technical mastery and aesthetic vision. The Roman road system, with its famous durability and efficiency, facilitated trade, communication, and military movement throughout the empire. Roman roads were built to last, with deep foundations, multiple layers of stone and gravel, and careful attention to drainage that enabled many of them to remain in use for centuries after the fall of the empire. Roman aqueducts supplied fresh water to cities throughout the Mediterranean world, supporting urban populations far larger than would otherwise have been possible. The engineering principles underlying Roman aqueduct construction, including the use of gravity flow, settling tanks, and distribution systems, represented sophisticated solutions to complex technical challenges. Cities like Rome itself received water from multiple aqueducts that could supply over 1 million residents with fresh water for drinking, bathing, and industrial use. Roman architecture, while heavily influenced by Greek models, developed distinctive innovations like the arch, the dome, and concrete construction that allowed for building projects of unprecedented scale and ambition. The development of concrete using volcanic ash enabled Roman builders to create structures of enormous size and complexity that would have been impossible using traditional stone construction techniques. The Pantheon in Rome, with its massive concrete dome, remained the largest unsupported dome in the world for over 1,000 years and continues to inspire architects today. The building demonstrates the Roman ability to combine Greek aesthetic principles with innovative engineering techniques to create structures that were both beautiful and functionally superior to anything previously built. The Colosseum and other Roman amphitheaters demonstrated the Roman ability to organize massive public entertainments that helped maintain social cohesion in the diverse urban populations of the empire. These structures, with their complex systems of underground chambers, mechanical devices for staging spectacles, and efficient crowd management systems, represented remarkable achievements in both engineering and social organization. The expansion of Roman power throughout the Mediterranean world created opportunities for unprecedented cultural exchange and synthesis. Roman conquest brought Greek intellectual traditions into contact with local cultures throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, creating a cosmopolitan civilization that preserved and transmitted the achievements of many different peoples. The Roman Empire served as a vast network for the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices that enriched the entire Mediterranean world. Roman authors like Cicero and Virgil created literary works that combined Greek artistic techniques with distinctively Roman themes and values. Cicero's speeches and philosophical writings demonstrated the Roman genius for practical application of Greek intellectual traditions to contemporary political and social challenges. His works on rhetoric, ethics, and political philosophy provided systematic treatments of these subjects that remained influential throughout the medieval period and beyond. Virgil's Aeneid created a national epic for Rome that rivaled the Homeric poems while expressing distinctively Roman values of duty, sacrifice, and imperial destiny. The poem traces the journey of Aeneas from the ruins of Troy to the founding of Rome, providing a mythological foundation for Roman imperial expansion, while also exploring themes of loss, exile, and the costs of achieving greatness. The reign of Augustus, the first Roman emperor, marked the beginning of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and prosperity that lasted for approximately 2 centuries and represented perhaps the high point of ancient civilization. Augustus's political settlement, which preserved the forms of republican government while concentrating real power in the hands of the emperor, provided stability and effective administration while avoiding the civil wars that had destroyed the Roman Republic. Under imperial rule, the Mediterranean world experienced unprecedented economic integration, cultural exchange, and urban development. Cities throughout the empire were connected by efficient transportation and communication networks that facilitated trade, travel, and the exchange of ideas. The Roman imperial system created conditions for economic prosperity and cultural development that would not be matched again in Europe for over 1,000 years. During this period, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Britain in the north to Egypt in the south, and from Spain in the west to Mesopotamia in the east. This vast territory encompassed an enormous diversity of peoples, languages, cultures, and economic systems, all united under Roman law and administration. The challenge of governing such a diverse empire led to innovations in administration, law, and military organization that would influence governmental systems for centuries to come. The Roman imperial administration developed sophisticated systems for collecting taxes, maintaining records, and coordinating policy across vast distances. The imperial postal system, with its network of roads, way stations, and relay riders, enabled rapid communication between the capital and the provinces. The Roman bureaucracy, staffed by both citizens and freedmen, developed standardized procedures for administration that could be applied consistently throughout the empire. The Roman Empire also provided the political and cultural context for the emergence and spread of Christianity, which would prove to be one of the most significant developments in human history. The Christian message, with its emphasis on universal human dignity, divine love, and moral transformation, found fertile ground in the cosmopolitan environment of the Roman Empire. The efficient Roman transportation and communication networks that had been designed for military and administrative purposes proved equally effective for spreading religious ideas. The early Christian movement benefited from the religious tolerance and cultural diversity of the Roman Empire, which allowed new ideas to spread and compete in the marketplace of religious and philosophical alternatives. The universalist message of Christianity, which offered salvation to all people regardless of social status or ethnic background, proved particularly appealing in the diverse urban centers of the empire. The conversion of Constantine in the early 4th century of the Common Era marked a fundamental turning point in both Roman and Christian history. The imperial endorsement of Christianity transformed it from a persecuted minority religion into the dominant cultural force in the empire, while Christian moral and theological ideas began to influence Roman law, administration, and social practices. Constantine's Edict of Milan, in 313 granted religious freedom throughout the empire and ended the persecution of Christians that had occurred periodically during the previous centuries. His personal conversion and active support for Christian institutions encouraged the rapid spread of Christianity and the development of a close relationship between church and state that would influence European civilization for centuries to come. However, even as Christianity was transforming Roman culture, the empire itself was facing increasing challenges that would ultimately prove insurmountable. The sheer size of the empire made effective central administration increasingly difficult, while the cost of maintaining the military forces necessary to defend such extensive frontiers placed enormous strain on the imperial economy. The 3rd century crisis, during which the empire nearly collapsed under the pressure of military defeats, economic inflation, and political instability, revealed the fundamental challenges facing Roman civilization. The empire's recovery under Diocletian and Constantine required significant changes in governmental structure, military organization, and economic policy that transformed the character of Roman civilization. Pressure from barbarian tribes along the northern and eastern frontiers intensified during the 3rd and 4th centuries, requiring constant military attention and resources. The traditional Roman policy of incorporating barbarian peoples into the empire became increasingly difficult as the numbers of migrants increased, and their cultural differences from Roman norms became more pronounced. The division of the empire into eastern and western halves in the late 3rd century represented an attempt to make the imperial system more manageable, but it also reflected the fundamental challenges facing Roman civilization. The Western Empire, centered in Rome, faced increasing pressure from Germanic tribes and internal political instability, while the Eastern Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, proved more resilient but gradually evolved into a distinctly different civilization. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the late 5th century of the Common Era marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of what historians traditionally call the medieval period. However, the collapse of Roman political authority did not mean the complete disappearance of Roman civilization. Roman law, language, administrative practices, and cultural traditions continued to influence European development throughout the medieval period and beyond. The transition from the ancient to the medieval world was gradual and complex, involving not just the collapse of Roman political authority, but also the transformation of economic systems, social structures, and cultural practices throughout Europe. The decline of urban life, the disruption of long-distance trade networks, and the fragmentation of political authority created conditions very different from those that had characterized the height of Roman civilization. The process of transformation varied significantly in different regions of the former empire. In some areas, Roman institutions and practices persisted for centuries after the collapse of central authority, while in others, new forms of social and political organization emerged more rapidly. The interaction between Roman traditions, Christian institutions, and barbarian customs created diverse patterns of development that would shape European civilization throughout the medieval period. The early medieval period, sometimes called the Dark Ages, witnessed significant changes in European society and culture. The collapse of centralized political authority led to the emergence of new forms of social organization based on personal relationships and local loyalties rather than imperial law and administration. The feudal system that gradually developed throughout much of Europe represented an adaptation to conditions of political fragmentation and economic localization. Feudalism created hierarchical relationships based on land tenure and personal loyalty that provided stability and security in the absence of effective central government. Lords granted land to vassals in exchange for military service and loyalty, creating networks of mutual obligation that could provide local defense and administration. Though this system was less efficient than imperial administration, it proved adaptable to local conditions and capable of maintaining basic social order during periods of political chaos. Christianity played a crucial role in providing continuity and stability during this period of transition. The Christian Church, with its network of bishops, monasteries, and schools, preserved much of the learning and cultural achievement of the ancient world while also developing new institutions and practices adapted to medieval conditions. The church provided not only religious guidance but also education, social services, and political leadership that helped maintain civilization during periods of political upheaval. Monasteries became centers of learning, agricultural innovation, and economic development that helped maintain civilization during periods of political chaos and social upheaval. Monastic communities preserved classical texts, developed new agricultural techniques, and provided education and social services to surrounding communities. The rule of Saint Benedict, established in the 6th century, created a systematic approach to monastic life that emphasized prayer, work, and study in ways that contributed to both spiritual development and practical achievement. The preservation of classical learning in monasteries and cathedral schools ensured that the intellectual achievements of Greece and Rome would not be entirely lost during the medieval period. Medieval scholars like Boethius, Cassiodorus, and later figures like Alcuin and Thomas Aquinas worked to preserve, interpret, and build upon ancient philosophical and scientific traditions, creating syntheses that would provide foundations for later intellectual development. Boethius, writing in the early 6th century, translated and commented upon works of Aristotle and other Greek philosophers, making classical learning accessible to medieval scholars who could not read Greek. His Consolation of Philosophy, written while he was imprisoned and awaiting execution, combined classical philosophical themes with Christian beliefs in ways that would influence medieval thought for centuries. The Islamic conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries created another crucial link between the ancient and medieval worlds. Islamic civilization, which expanded rapidly from Arabia throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and into Spain, preserved and developed many aspects of Greek and Roman learning that might otherwise have been lost. Islamic scholars translated and commented upon the works of Aristotle, Plato, Galen, and other ancient authors, while also making original contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a major center for the translation and study of classical texts, while Islamic universities in cities like Cordoba, Cairo, and Damascus attracted students from throughout the known world. Islamic scholars like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes created sophisticated philosophical and scientific works that preserved and extended classical traditions, while also incorporating insights from Islamic theology and other intellectual traditions. The interaction between Islamic, Byzantine, and Western European civilizations during the medieval period created opportunities for cultural exchange and intellectual development that would prove crucial for later European advancement. The translation of Arabic texts into Latin during the 12th and 13th centuries reintroduced much classical learning to Western Europe and provided the foundation for the intellectual renaissance of the later medieval period. The Crusades, despite their military and political failures, facilitated cultural exchange between European and Islamic civilizations that enriched both traditions. European scholars gained access to classical texts that had been preserved in Arabic translation, while Islamic scholars encountered European developments in theology, law, and institutional organization. The Carolingian Renaissance of the 8th and 9th centuries represented an early attempt to revive classical learning and create a unified Christian civilization in Western Europe. Under Charlemagne and his successors, scholars from throughout Europe gathered at the Carolingian court to preserve and study ancient texts, develop new educational curricula, and create cultural institutions that would influence European development for centuries to come. Charlemagne's palace school at Aachen became a center for educational reform that established standards for literacy and learning throughout the Carolingian Empire. The development of Carolingian minuscule, a clear and efficient script for copying manuscripts, facilitated the preservation and transmission of classical and Christian texts. The educational reforms initiated during this period created foundations for later intellectual development and helped establish Latin as the common scholarly language of medieval Europe. The development of medieval universities, beginning in the 11th and 12th centuries, marked another crucial step in the preservation and development of classical learning. Universities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford became centers of intellectual activity that combined Christian theology with classical philosophy and science, creating new synthetic approaches to understanding the natural world and human society. The university system that emerged during this period created institutional frameworks for advanced education and research that would prove essential for later intellectual development. The curriculum of the medieval university, with its emphasis on logic, rhetoric, and systematic argumentation, preserved and developed classical educational traditions while also incorporating new insights from Christian theology and Islamic scholarship. The medieval period also witnessed significant technological innovations that would have profound consequences for later European development. The introduction of new agricultural techniques like the heavy plow and field system increased agricultural productivity and supported population growth. These innovations, combined with the clearing of new farmland and improvements in crop rotation, created the economic foundations for the urban revival and cultural renaissance of the later medieval period. The development of water mills and windmills provided new sources of mechanical power that would prove essential for later industrial development. Medieval engineers and craftsmen developed increasingly sophisticated mechanical devices that demonstrated both technical skill and innovative problem-solving abilities. The mechanical clock, invented in the 13th century, represented a major breakthrough in precision engineering that would have far-reaching consequences for science, navigation, and industrial development. Medieval craftsmen and engineers made important advances in metallurgy, construction techniques, and mechanical devices that built upon classical foundations while also developing new solutions to practical problems. The great Gothic cathedrals of the 12th and 13th centuries demonstrated both technical mastery and aesthetic vision that rivaled the achievements of ancient civilizations while expressing distinctively medieval cultural values. Gothic architecture represented a synthesis of engineering innovation and artistic vision that created some of the most impressive buildings in human history. The development of the pointed arch, flying buttress, and ribbed vault enabled medieval architects to build structures of unprecedented height and lightness, while also creating interior spaces that inspired religious devotion and aesthetic appreciation. The medieval period also saw the emergence of new forms of political organization that would provide foundations for the development of modern European states. The gradual consolidation of royal authority in countries like France and England created more effective central governments, while also developing new concepts of law, administration, and political legitimacy that built upon both classical and Christian traditions. The development of common law in England and canon law in the Church created systematic approaches to legal administration that influenced later legal development throughout Europe. The growth of parliamentary institutions in England and representative assemblies in other European countries established precedents for constitutional government and popular participation in political decision-making. The revival of trade and urban life during the later medieval period created economic conditions that supported cultural and intellectual development while also fostering new forms of social organization. The growth of merchant classes and craft guilds created new centers of wealth and political influence that would challenge traditional feudal hierarchies and contribute to the eventual transformation of European society. The commercial revolution of the later medieval period re-established long-distance trade networks that connected Europe with Asia and Africa, creating opportunities for cultural exchange and economic development that had not existed since the fall of the Roman Empire. The development of new financial instruments like bills of exchange and double-entry bookkeeping facilitated commercial expansion while also creating foundations for later capitalist development. As we reach the end of our journey through the foundational periods of human civilization, from the emergence of our earliest ancestors through the establishment of medieval European society, we can see the continuous thread of human creativity, adaptability, an ambition that has driven the development of increasingly complex and sophisticated societies. Each civilization we have examined has built upon the achievements of its predecessors while also developing distinctive innovations that reflected its particular circumstances and cultural values. The story of human civilization reveals both the remarkable consistency of human nature across different times and places and the extraordinary diversity of solutions that different societies have developed to address common challenges. From the agricultural innovations of the Neolithic Revolution to the political experiments of ancient Greece. From the engineering achievements of Rome to the intellectual syntheses of medieval scholars, we see evidence of humanity's persistent drive to understand the world, improve living conditions, and create meaning through cultural achievement. The civilizations we have explored established patterns of social organization, technological development, and cultural expression that continue to influence human societies today. The agricultural techniques developed in ancient Mesopotamia provided foundations for all subsequent farming practices. The political innovations of Athens and Rome established concepts of citizenship, law, and governance that remain central to modern democratic theory. The intellectual methods developed by Greek philosophers and scientists provided essential tools for rational inquiry that continue to guide human investigation of the natural world. The preservation and transmission of classical learning through Islamic scholarship and medieval institutions ensured that the achievements of ancient civilizations would not be lost, but would instead provide foundations for later cultural and intellectual development. The synthesis of classical, Christian, and Islamic traditions that characterized medieval civilization created new forms of knowledge and cultural expression that would prove essential for the Renaissance and the emergence of modern civilization. Perhaps most importantly, these early civilizations demonstrated both the potential for human achievement when favorable conditions are combined with cultural innovation, and the importance of strong institutions in maintaining civilization across long periods of time. The rise and fall of great empires, the preservation and transmission of cultural traditions, and the continuous process of adaptation to changing circumstances provide lessons that remain relevant for contemporary societies facing their own challenges of sustainability, governance, and cultural development. The foundation laid by these early civilizations created the basis upon which all subsequent human achievement would be built, establishing traditions of learning, governance, artistic expression, and technological innovation that would continue to evolve and develop throughout history. The story of human civilization from its earliest beginnings through the medieval period reveals both the extraordinary achievements of which human beings are capable and the ongoing challenges of creating and maintaining societies that embody humanity's highest aspirations and deepest values. As we conclude this exploration of humanity's foundational chapters, we can appreciate both how far human civilization has come from its humble beginnings and how much of our contemporary world still reflects the achievements and insights of these ancient peoples, who first dared to imagine that human beings could create societies worthy of their highest aspirations and deepest values. The legacy of these civilizations continues to shape our understanding of politics, law, education, science, art, and the fundamental questions of human existence, reminding us that we are part of a continuous story of human striving for knowledge, justice, beauty, and meaning that extends back thousands of years and will continue far into the future.